Well, let me just get you up to date on that breaking news we're getting. Russia at the United Nations in that meeting, in that emergency meeting held over North Korea's test, has opposed sanctions and military action against North Korea. Again, Russia at the United Nations opposing sanctions and military action against North Korea. Let's now discuss all of this. We're joined by Mr. Jason Unruhe, who is an independent media personality and political commentator, and he's joining us live now via Skype from Ontario. Jason, as always, thanks for joining us here on Press TV. What do you make of this UN Security Council meeting called in an emergency over North Korea?
Well, it's certainly an emergency. The United States has now been put right to the absolute red line. And the intercontinental ballistic missile was the last line that needed to be crossed before the DPRK was fully capable of striking the U.S. mainland. And now with that red line now having been crossed, the United States is now worried that the DPRK is fully capable of defending itself. The nuclear deterrent that the country has always held on to has always been something that could be used against forces occupying the South. But now the nuclear deterrent could strike the U.S. mainland, and the DPRK demands to be left alone now must be taken more seriously. It has now reached a point where a military option is not possible. The United States may say that it wishes to, but the consequences of doing so would actually be very grave, because the DPRK now can strike the United States mainland and take the pain to the imperialists as they would try to seek upon them. Now, the surrounding states are very, very concerned because they realize how serious this is. Now both sides can strike each other. Twice the amount of weapons capable of being used equals twice the amount of danger.
Indeed, and interestingly, Jason, as you were saying that, we got breaking news about the Russian statement at the UN Security Council. Russia saying that the deployment of this anti-missile system in South Korea is a serious hit to the stability of the region, including, of course, to Russia and China themselves. How destabilizing, Jason, has this deployment of THAAD been to that region?
Oh, it's definitely been a serious destabilization. The DPRK has always maintained that it wanted to use weapons in order to defend itself. This is a kind of arms race. If the DPRK creates something to defend itself and then the U.S. installs something to counter that defense, then the DPRK must respond in kind by creating something even more powerful. This is somewhat akin to an arms race that will mostly be taking place on the Korean Peninsula. If the U.S. were to just simply seek a path of peace, and that is to just leave the DPRK be and allow them to engage in mutually beneficial trade with its neighbors and seek peaceful coexistence, none of this would be necessary. But the United States is hell-bent on having a regime change inside of the DPRK because it does not bow to U.S. imperialist interests. And as a result, we're getting an escalation of military technologies on the peninsula.
And so how do you think, Jason, that the Russia and China will respond? We're seeing these live images, of course, still coming out of the Security Council where that meeting continues. Russia and China, obviously, from day one have been against the deployment of THAAD, saying that they would destabilize the region. But now that that has already been deployed and North Korea is continuing to test its weapons, what can and should they be doing now?
Well, China and Russia certainly want a peaceful and stable situation in the Korean Peninsula because it benefits trade from both of them being the biggest customers, the biggest trade allies with the DPRK. The greater the hostilities, the less trade can coexist. The less trade can be carried out between the countries peacefully. They would rather there be a calm, quiet situation where they can just do business and not worry about war breaking out. Economic sanctions is not something that I think Russia and China really want to do because they want to do the business, but they are somewhat stuck in the middle where they do want to prevent a destabilization, but they also can't allow the DPRK to simply be left vulnerable to the United States. Any erasure of the DPRK from the map by the United States would no doubt end with a puppet government that would place a U.S. ally on the borders with both countries. And that's not a situation that either country wants. Both Russia and China would really wish that this whole situation would just go away and that the DPRK could be left alone to just pursue its own path of peace.
Okay, Jason, we'll leave there at that. But of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time to speak to us here at Press TV. These, again, are live images coming out of the United Nations Security Council, where that emergency meeting on North Korea continues. Of course, the U.S. calling for more sanctions, Russia against sanctions and military action. We'll, of course, have to see how all of that plays out.